Welcome to Belton House, one of the finest creations of the restoration period of building in England, which is about 1685, surrounded by a also equally fine park with a large herd of fallow deer in it. I'm Andrew Barber, curator for the East Midlands, and my colleague Chris Shaw, who's the head ranger here at Belton.
Yeah, the park is about 750 acres. Within that park there is a head of about 300 or so fallow deer. Shall we go and have a look? Belton Park is 750 acres of deer park. Within that park we have a head of, give or take, around 300 fallow deer. We did have all four variations, and now there are three. So we've got the melanistics, the Menels and the commons. The white deer, she was shot by poachers a few years ago. It'd be a nice idea to reintroduce white to Belton. It's on my wish list. We think we've got the balance about right at Belton regarding visitors and the herd. The deer aren't enclosed, they're not in a compound. The few visitors that do use the park can get up close and personal with the herd. This herd, we don't supplementary feed at all. There is enough grazing for the herd to carry out, to live perfectly well without any kind of supplementary. Even through a harsh winter, we haven't had to feed. There are very few records about the history of the herd. There's very scant records. We know the herd's been here for 300 years. We know there was an introduction in the 1940s. We know that the herd reached a number of about 800 in the 1800s and was drastically reduced during or just after the First World War down to possibly somewhere around 25. Maybe due to the fact that there was an army camp on the place. I think it was venison on the menu every night.
There's a wonderful plan in the house at Belton which is signed by the landscape designer Eames, and it shows a landscape which you can't actually at first glance recognise at all, because an awful lot of what he suggested wasn't carried out by his patron, who was the first Lord Brownlow in the 1770s. And the other feature, which predated Eames by quite a lot, which is the old wood on the borders of which we're standing now, and that is a plantation that probably predates the park. But Eames very much suggested retaining it, and it was very important, and still is very important to the deer herd as an area of refuge for them and for fawning. I think Eames will have been well aware there was a deer herd here, and it was an important part of the life of the park. But his design was one that answered the topography and was aesthetic. I think probably before it was deliberately practical. I mean, obviously deer need a sward to graze, and enough of it, and they need water and they need shelter. And all of those things Eames' design readily offered. But I don't think there was, there is no evidence, to put it that way, in this instance that design was done specifically for deer, although there is a mention on Eames's plan of an area for early venison. That tradition of using the venison for the purpose for which it was created, as say eating it and selling it, continues, and if you come to Belton you can enjoy venison on the menu at appropriate times of year. In the restaurant. And it's necessary to cull the herd. There's a limited area on which the herd lives, and so there is a necessity to cull each year. Young Sir John Brownlow, who built Belton House, had inherited from his great-uncle, and he'd inherited an awful lot of money because his wife was also his cousin, and all the family fortunes which had been made in the legal profession during Elizabethan times and later came together in these two, and they were immensely wealthy. And they built a very grand house, and they had already parcelled up a lot of land around, and they just needed to empark it. They wanted to have it so it was their private domain, and although it was still farmed, outlying areas of it, because it's much bigger than the current area of the park, it extended both east and west. They will have wanted to have as much as possible, because it was a show of wealth, it was a show of status, and part of that status was to have a fine herd of deer. Deer in the Middle Ages were royal beasts. People weren't allowed to have deer without a royal license. And so to empark, to build a wall around your land and make a park out of it, needed a specific royal license. And John Brownlow was well aware of this, and he will have petitioned for permission, which was given. And 2 or 3 years later, the King, William III, came and dined at Belton, had a very good time by all accounts. And no doubt he will have admired the herd here, because William enjoyed hunting very much indeed. So the deer have been a fixture, a fluctuating fixture in the park, and sometimes contentious, sometimes not, but always providing food for the house.
So this is our knucklebone floor. We excavated this last summer, and it was quite a spectacular discovery at the time. So we can see just in this little section we've got open today, you've got an almost mosaic-like pattern of knucklebones. From our limited excavations, it looks as though there's been 2 very distinct phases of building here. So we've got the first phase, which is when they put the floor down, and then the second phase is when we've got that brick structure going up around it.
So this area here looks ever so slightly different from the rest. Is there a reason for that?
Yeah, this is really interesting actually. So when we excavated it, we were wondering why this was
Slightly raised.
Yeah, slightly raised, kind of quite poorly constructed.
Yeah.
The rest of it, of the floor, is clearly set into a pattern. What we think has happened at some point, for some reason there's been sort of movement in this part of the floor. Maybe someone's kind of, I don't know, if tree roots come through, or someone's disturbed that floor. And what they've done is a repair, but interestingly, with the repair, rather than using sheep knuckle bones, they've used fallow deer knuckle bones.
Right, okay. So would it be possible for us to use some of this for the genetic analysis?
Definitely, that'd be really great to find out more. Should we take one of the bones now?
Yeah, that would be great.
Okay, we'll take this one. There we go.
Oh, great. So this is actually the bottom end of the bone, is it?
That's right, yeah.
Oh, right. So I think I'll try and take some DNA from over this side here, just a little square, and then it would be great to compare it to the modern day herd here. Do you think it would be possible for me to get some samples from the modern herd?
I'm sure it would. What you need to do is speak to Chris, who's our head ranger and looks after the deer herd here.
Brilliant, because I think that would be really nice to see if there's any continuity in the herd from the historical periods up till today.
So after we met last time, I went back to the lab and I extracted a piece of the bone out of the knucklebone floor that you have here at Belton House. And what I was able to do is I was then able to extract the DNA from the sample. And what I then did was I then compared how this bone compared to the other fallow deer that we have across the UK from both historical populations and modern populations. And I found some quite interesting results. So this is the results of the genetic network here. And basically the genetic network just tells you about the relationships between different populations and different animals from different areas, if you like. And what you find is you'll see that here we have Roman populations, which are quite separate from anything that you get post-medieval and modern, which includes this one. So this one isn't related to any of the Roman populations, because of course the Romans first introduced the fallow deer. So what we think happened is that the Roman fallow deer went extinct, and then in the post-Norman, or when the Normans conquered Britain, they then reintroduced the fallow deer, and all of the fallow deer we have today group over here, including our Belton House sample. And if we look a bit closer about where this Belton House sample, who it shares its genetic variant with, we find that actually shares its genetic variant with some samples from medieval Hungate in York, a sample from medieval Durham, and also modern Witham Woods. So we find there's some genetic affiliation in the historical herds with maybe a northern area. And interestingly, it seems genetic variant has persisted to today. But what's going to be the next thing to do is really to test whether we have that continuity here at Belton.